They sent SOS to allies, but the Deathworlders Armada came instead. Part 1. The Desperate. Plath Galactic Council chamber was dark and cold. Governor Elena Torres watched from the observation window as the last reports came in from Meridian Colony. The numbers were brutal and clear. The Xylothian Collective had destroyed 3 defense stations in 2 days. Now they were moving toward the main colony with overwhelming force. 15,000 civilians lived on Meridian. Elena knew what would happen if the Collective reached them. The aliens did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. Elena was the highest-ranking human official in the council. She had worked for 10 years to earn respect from the other species. The Solarians trusted her somewhat. The Kethrans considered her decisions logical. But none of it mattered now. The peace she had fought for was crumbling in front of her eyes. The communication officer turned to her, with panic in his voice. The Collective had sent a message to all colonies. Surrender now or face complete destruction. The deadline was 72 hours. Elena knew they would not make it. The nearest military force was the Meridian Defense Fleet under Captain Nathan Hayes. He was good. He was brave. But he had only 12 ships against the Collective's 40. Elena made her decision in seconds. She moved to the transmission console and activated the emergency broadcast protocol. This signal would reach every spacefaring nation in the galaxy. This was the call that every species had agreed to answer. When one civilization faced extinction, all others would respond. She began to speak. Her voice was steady even though her heart was breaking. She explained the situation clearly. The Xylothian Collective was invading. Meridian would fall within days without help. She asked for military support. She asked for ships. She asked for soldiers. She asked for hope. The response from most of the galaxy was slow and cautious. The Solarians said they could send a small fleet, but it would take 3 weeks to arrive. The Valorians said they would contribute resources and supplies. The Kethrans said they were still deliberating. Everyone wanted to help, but everyone was also afraid. The Collective was powerful. Many species had learned this lesson the hard way. But then something unexpected happened. A signal came back from a direction that nobody expected. It came from the Outer Rim territories. It came from the New World. It came from Earth. Captain Nathan Hayes received the distress call on his bridge. He was a practical man. He had survived in the military by thinking clearly and trusting his instincts. When he read the reports about Meridian, he knew exactly what they meant. In 3 days, thousands of people would die. His ships could not stop that alone. He sent a message up the chain of command. He requested immediate reinforcements. The response came back quickly. High Command was working on it. Help was coming, but nothing would arrive in time. They told him to hold position and wait for orders. Nathan Hayes was not a man who liked waiting. He had taken the captain's chair at age 35. He had fought in 3 wars and lost friends in every single one. He had learned that waiting was often just another word for doing nothing while people died. He studied the incoming data about the Xylothian forces. They were moving fast and hard. Their ships were bigger than his. Their weapons were more advanced than his older vessels. But they were also spreading out too thin. They were overconfident. They had beaten every opponent they had faced for the past 2 years. They believed they were unstoppable. Nathan began to think about a counterattack. It was risky. It might not work, but it was better than waiting for orders while civilians burned. Back at the Galactic Council, Commander Lisa Grant was in a crisis meeting with the leadership of humanity. Earth had joined the galactic community only 5 years ago. The other species had been shocked to discover that humans existed. They were even more shocked to learn what kind of world humans came from. Earth was a harsh planet. It had deadly weather. It had predators that could kill you in 100 different ways. The gravity was stronger than most other worlds. The temperature swings were extreme. Humans had evolved in this brutal environment, and that evolution had made them different from every other spacefaring species. The Solarians were delicate. The Kethrans were thoughtful. The Valorians were organized and efficient. But humans were something else entirely. They were adaptable. They were stubborn. They had high pain tolerance. They could function under stress that would destroy other species. Psychologically, the Human Leadership Council looked at the distress call from Meridian. Some of them said no. Earth had just joined the galactic community. They should focus on building relationships and peaceful trade. They should not throw soldiers into an unknown conflict. It was too dangerous. It was too expensive. But Lisa Grant stood up in that meeting, and she made a different argument. She said that the collective would not stop at Meridian. If they were allowed to grow unchecked, they would eventually threaten Earth itself. She said that the time to stop them was now, when they were still limited to one region of space. More importantly, she said something that surprised everyone. She said that humanity had not come all this way to hide. They had not come to be passive members of the community. They had come to help. They had come to stand with others against darkness. That was what humans did. That was who they were. The vote was close, but it went her way. The human military was mobilized. All available ships were called back from civilian duties. Crews were assembled. Supplies were loaded. Orders were prepared. Lisa Grant stood in the Military Operations Center and watched the preparations happen. She was committing human forces to a battle that might end in disaster. If this went wrong, she would be blamed for throwing away the lives of human soldiers. But if she did nothing and the collective kept growing, that blame would be small compared to the suffering that would come later. She sent a message to Captain Nathan Hayes telling him that help was on the way. She told him that human ships were coming. She told him that he should hold position and wait for reinforcements. But she also told him something else. She told him that humanity was coming to the galaxy not as merchants or traders, but as defenders. She told him that the collective would soon understand what it meant to face a Deathworld species. Nathan Hayes received that message, and he understood immediately what it meant. Humanity was coming to fight. And when humans fought, they fought with everything they had. The Xylothian collective had no idea what was coming toward them. They had fought other species before. They had won every time. They believed they were superior. They believed they were unstoppable. In 3 days, their entire understanding of the universe would change forever. They sent SOS to allies, but the Deathworlders Armada came instead. Part 2. The Deathworlders arrive. The human armada dropped out of jump space like a hammer striking an anvil. 37 warships emerged in perfect formation, each one carrying weapons and armor that had been designed in the fires of Earth's brutal history. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the flagship, the UNSS Earthshield. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display showing the position of every Xylothian vessel in the region. The collective's commander, Supreme Leader Vex, received the report about the incoming human fleet with something between amusement and contempt. He had seen the data about Earth. He knew that humans were new to space. They had primitive technology compared to the collective's advanced systems. 37 ships was nothing. He had destroyed larger fleets before. These Deathworlders would learn quickly that they had made a fatal mistake. Vex sent a message to his fleet commanders. Attack immediately. Do not wait for the humans to establish a defensive position. Overwhelm them with force and speed. And this quickly. The collective fleet numbered 68 ships. They were larger than the human vessels and more heavily armed. They moved toward the human armada with the confidence of a predator, stalking prey that it had already decided to kill. What? happened next shocked the entire galaxy. The human ships did not move like other military forces. They did not maintain careful formation. They did not follow the standard protocols of space warfare that every species had agreed to follow. Instead, they scattered. They attacked in patterns that seemed random but were actually perfectly calculated. They moved their ships with a kind of aggressive grace that should not have been possible with such large vessels. The first, Xylothian, ship to engage made a critical error. The commander believed that human shields were weaker than collective shields. He was right about that, but he did not anticipate that human pilots would compensate for this weakness through raw tactical skill and willingness to take risks. A human destroyer named the Uns Valiant accelerated to a speed that made its own captain's teeth ache. It fired at point-blank range while simultaneously performing a maneuver that should have torn the ship. Apart from the stress, it did not tear apart. The human engineers had designed the ship to survive what no other species would ever attempt. The Valiant fired 6 missiles directly into the Xylothian vessel's unshielded aft section. The collective ship exploded in a burst of light that lit up the tactical display screens across the region. The Xylothian commanders began to realize that this was not going to be an easy victory. Their training had taught them to respond to threats in a certain way. Move to position. Establish defensive formation. Maintain weapons lock until target was destroyed. But the humans did not fight this way. They attacked with what appeared to be chaos, but was actually beautiful, terrible precision. A young pilot named Marcus Cross sat in the cockpit of a human fighter. He had been flying combat missions for 5 years. He had seen death in all its forms. But this moment was different. This was what he had trained for. This was what every human soldier had been waiting for since they learned that the galaxy was full of life. Marcus locked onto a collective fighter and accelerated. The other pilot tried to break formation and escape. That was a logical decision. Marcus was flying an older model fighter with limited fuel. But Marcus had something the other pilot did not have. He had grown up on Earth. He had learned to accept pain, hunger, and fear as normal parts of life. He had learned to push himself and his equipment past the point where other species would give up. He caught the Xylothian fighter and fired. His weapons lanced out and struck true. The enemy fighter's shields flashed and failed. The pilot ejected seconds before the explosion consumed his ship. The battle raged for 8 hours without stopping. The Xylothian collective kept sending ships to fight. The humans kept destroying them. It was like watching a student fighter face off against a master, except the student was winning. The human armada fought with tactics that confused the collective at every turn. When the collective tried to encircle the human fleet, the humans broke formation and attacked the encirclement from inside. Supreme, Leader Vex watched his casualty reports and felt something he had never experienced before. He felt fear. His fleet was losing. His ships were dying faster than he could replace them. The humans were somehow able to predict his moves and counter them. Before he even finished executing his orders, he sent his elite guard ships forward. These were his finest vessels, commanded by his most experienced officers. They would crush the human flagship and end this ridiculous interference once and for all. The elite guard ships were impressive. They were heavily armored and carried weapons that had been tested against every major power in the galaxy. But they had never faced humans before. They had never seen what humans could do. When they decided that dying was better than failing, the UNSS Earth Shield met them head-on. Commander Grant gave orders that made her tactical team wince. She told the ship's captain to take damage on the starboard shields while concentrating all weapons fire on the collective's command ship. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was exactly what the situation required. The Earth Shield took hits that should have disabled it. Explosions ripped through several compartments. The ship shook like an animal being beaten, but its weapon systems kept firing. Its shields held just long enough. The Collective's command ship took 3 direct hits from human missiles and began to break apart. One by one, the elite guard ships were destroyed. By the time the battle ended, the Xylithian Collective had lost 42 vessels. The human armada had lost 3 ships, with another 5 damaged, badly enough that they needed immediate repairs. The casualty numbers were shocking to everyone who reviewed them. The humans had destroyed more than half of the Collective's fleet, while losing only about 8% of their own forces. This kind of ratio was unheard of in modern galactic warfare. Supreme, Leader Vex stared at the tactical display and understood the terrible truth. The humans were not just another military force. They were something new. They were something dangerous in a way that no other species had ever been dangerous. They fought like warriors who had nothing to lose because they had come from a world where everything wanted to kill them. They fought like soldiers who understood that victory required willingness to accept pain and sacrifice. And the worst part, from Vex's perspective, was that they seemed to be enjoying it. He could see it in the combat records. The human pilots were making tactical decisions that balanced between logic and what could only be described as joy. They loved the fight. They loved the challenge. They loved the chance to prove what they could do. The Collective had made a terrible mistake. They had thought the humans were just another spacefaring species trying to carve out a place in the galaxy. They had not understood that humans came from a world that had shaped them into something entirely different. They had not understood that they were facing Deathworlders. They sent SOS to allies, but the Deathworlders Armada came instead. Part 3. The Unexpected. The Coalition war room was filled with nervous energy. The leaders of 5 different species sat around a large table watching the battle reports come in. Governor Elena Torres stood at the front of the room with updates about the human performance. The numbers made people uncomfortable. The humans were winning too decisively. They were winning too fast. They were winning in a way that suggested they had capabilities that nobody had fully understood. The Solarian representative, a tall crystalline being that caught the light with every movement, spoke first. The ambassador had always been diplomatic and careful. Now she asked a direct question. Were the humans planning to stop after they defeated the Collective? Or would they continue expanding their military power? Elena understood the fear behind the question. Every species in the galaxy worried about the same thing. Could the humans be trusted? Would they use their military superiority to dominate others? Had the Coalition just invited a new threat into its midst? Elena answered carefully. She explained that humanity had joined the galactic community as peaceful traders and neighbors. They were responding to the distress call because they believed it was the right thing to do. They were not conquerors. They were defenders. The Kethran representative was less convinced. The Kethrans were a telepathic species. They believed that thought was more important than action. They said that humans seemed to possess a mentality that was fundamentally different from all other spacefaring peoples. Humans did not think like other species. Humans did not value caution or careful planning in the same way. Humans seemed to accept risk as a normal part of existence. Elena did not deny this. She said that Earth was a harsh world. Humans had evolved under conditions that taught them to be adaptable and brave. They had learned that taking calculated risks was often the key to survival. But this did not mean they would misuse their power. It simply meant they would use it differently than other species would. The debate continued for hours. Finally, Elena made an offer. She would personally visit the human fleet and monitor their actions. If she observed any behavior that suggested the humans were planning to seize power or expand beyond the agreed boundaries, she would report it immediately. The Coalition would have the right to revoke human military operations if they violated their commitments, The representatives agreed to this arrangement. Elena made arrangements to transfer to a human command ship. She would observe the human military in action and evaluate whether they could be trusted as true allies. The ship she was assigned to was the UNSS Valiant, the same destroyer that had made such an impressive first strike against the Collective. The captain was David Chun, a man in his late 40s with scars on his face from an accident during his early military training. He had survived because humans were resilient. He had survived because pain was not something that could stop him from doing his duty. Elena arrived on the bridge and immediately felt the difference in the atmosphere. The human crew was different from crews on other coalition ships. They were more casual. They spoke to each other in ways that would have been considered insubordinate in other military forces. But at the same time, there was a clarity of purpose that Elena recognized. Every person on this bridge knew exactly what they were supposed to do and why they were supposed to do it. Captain Chun greeted Elena formally. He understood that the coalition was nervous about human intentions. He told her that the humans respected the coalition's concerns. He promised her that the human fleet would operate under the same rules of engagement that governed all coalition military forces. No targeting of civilians. No unnecessary destruction. No taking of territory. They would fight to save Meridian and nothing more. Elena was satisfied with this answer. But over the next days, she saw something that really convinced her of human sincerity. A group of Xylothian refugees appeared in a damaged civilian transport. These were citizens of the Collective who had been living on a station that the Collective had destroyed. They were fleeing their own government. Their ship had limited fuel and no working weapons. They sent a distress signal in all directions, hoping someone would help them. The human ships nearest to the refugees were commanded by Lieutenant Amy Powell. She was a young officer in her early 30s with a reputation for being aggressive in combat. Elena assumed that Powell would follow protocol and contact Coalition Command for instructions. Instead, Powell did something different. She diverted a human destroyer directly to the refugee ship, placing it between the refugee transport and a pursuing Collective patrol. The destroyer sustained heavy damage protecting civilians. The ship's shields flared under the assault of Xylothian weapons. The hull took impacts that left visible scars, but the destroyer held position. It did not retreat. It did not ask for help. It simply blocked the attack and gave the refugee transport time to escape. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Collective patrol had been driven off. The refugees were safe. Elena watched this action and felt something shift in her perception. Powell had risked her ship and the lives of her crew to save aliens who were not part of the coalition. The refugees were enemies technically. They came from the Collective. But Powell had not cared about that distinction. She had only cared that people needed help, and she had the power to provide it. This was not the behavior of a species planning a power grab. This was the behavior of a species that genuinely believed in protecting others. Elena made her report to the Coalition Command. She told them that the humans could be trusted. She told them that human military power was real and formidable, but it was guided by genuine principles of defense and protection. The Coalition could work with these humans. They could form a true alliance. The war situation continued to shift in the Coalition's favor. The combined forces of human and allied ships began to push the Collective back. The Collective's supply lines were cut. Their forward bases were destroyed. Their fleet numbers continued to shrink while the Coalition's numbers grew stronger. On the human destroyer, something important was happening. A young human pilot named Marcus Cross had become close friends with a Kethran warrior named Zealous. They had met during a repair operation and discovered that they shared similar humor despite their biological differences. Cross was taller and stronger, but Zealous possessed mental abilities that seemed like magic to the human. Zealous could sense danger before it appeared. Cross could make instant decisions under pressure that no Catherine would ever be confident enough to make. Together, they trained. They flew together. They fought together. And in doing so, they became a symbol of something new. The Coalition had never seen true cooperation between humans and other species. It had always been careful negotiation and formal agreements. But Cross and Zealous worked together in a way that transcended mere agreement. They trusted each other completely. They would have died for each other without hesitation. This friendship spread through the Coalition forces. Other humans and other species began to work together more closely. The rigid separation between different military forces started to break down. They were becoming not just allies, but a real unified army. Supreme Leader Vex watched this development and understood another truth that terrified him. The humans were not just militarily superior. They were also more inspirational. They gave other species hope. They showed that different beings could work together toward a common goal. They made people believe that cooperation was possible. They sent SOS to allies, but the Deathworlders Armada came instead. Part 4. The Turning Point. Supreme Leader Vex stood in his command center and made a decision that he knew might fail. He had lost more than half his fleet. The Coalition was growing stronger every day. His supply lines were broken. His soldiers were exhausted. He could continue fighting a slow retreat, losing ship after ship until nothing remained. Or he could make one final assault with everything he had left. He chose the final assault. He gathered every remaining ship under his command. He emptied every depot and base. He called all personnel from inactive positions. He was going to launch an attack that would either destroy the Coalition or destroy the Collective. There would be no middle ground. The attack began with massive force. The remaining Collective ships came like a wave, hundreds of weapons firing in unison. The Coalition fleet responded immediately. This was the battle they had been preparing for. This was the moment when everything would be decided. Captain Nathan Hayes stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the engagement begin. He had lost comrades in this war. He had seen good people die. He had seen worlds threatened and families destroyed. Now it was time to finish it. Hayes made a decision that his tactical team told him was insane. He said that he was taking a strike team directly to Vex's flagship. He was going in this war by removing the Collective's command structure. No more waiting for overwhelming force. No more careful planning. One team, one mission. Final victory. His team consisted of 6 people. There was Lieutenant Amy Powell, the same officer who had risked her ship to save refugees. There was Marcus Cross, the pilot who had already proven his skills in 100 engagements. There was Sergeant James York from the human military. There was a Catherine warrior named Zealous, who had become as close to a brother as Cross could have. There was a Valorian combat specialist named Keeper, and a young medic named Hannah Drake. They loaded into a small transport ship and began their approach to Vex's flagship. The Collective's command vessel was heavily guarded. It had defensive weapons that could destroy the transport in seconds. It had elite guard soldiers who had never lost a battle. It had Supreme Leader Vex himself, a warrior who had defeated every opponent that ever faced him. The transport was hit by defensive fire multiple times. Explosions rocked the small ship. The shields flared and nearly failed. But they made it through. They reached the docking bay, and the team rushed out into hostile territory. What followed was a fight unlike anything that had ever occurred in galactic history. Nathan Hayes led the team forward with weapons blazing. His muscles burned from exertion. His wounds bled. His body screamed at him to stop. But he did not stop. He had learned on Earth that pain was not an excuse to fail. Pain was just a signal that you were pushing your limits. And Hayes needed to push beyond his limits right now. Lieutenant Powell fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. She moved through the collective's elite guards like a storm. The guards were stronger than her. The guards were faster than her. But Powell had one advantage. She did not hesitate. She did not consider the possibility of defeat. She only thought about the next enemy and how to neutralize the threat. Marcus cross-piloted a damaged cargo vessel while under fire. The ship's systems were failing. The controls barely responded to his inputs. But Cross flew that ship with the precision of someone who had done the impossible so many times that the impossible had become routine. He placed that ship exactly where it needed to be. It would block reinforcements from reaching the main battle. Zealous moved alongside, Cross with a weapon that seemed to glow with internal light. The Kethran warrior was smaller than the humans around him, but he was more skilled than any of them. He had trained for combat since he was young. He had fought in wars that human history had never recorded. And right now, he was fighting for his friend. That made him more dangerous than he had ever been. The team fought their way deeper into the ship. They lost Keeper when a collective soldiers triggered an explosive trap. The Valorian warrior took the blast meant for the group. He died knowing that he had protected friends who mattered to him. The remaining 5 fighters pushed forward. They reached the command chamber where Supreme Leader Vex was waiting. Vex was a being of pure power. He was twice the size of a human. He had strength that seemed impossible. He had weapons built into his body that could kill from any distance. Nathan Hayes stepped forward to face him alone. This was a human choice that Vex could not understand. A leader should hide behind soldiers. A leader should protect himself. But Hayes was willing to die if it meant stopping the threat. Vex attacked with devastating force. His strike would have killed a normal human instantly. But Hayes was not normal. He had muscles that had been shaped by gravity stronger than most worlds. He had reflexes that had been honed by fighting animals that wanted to eat him. He moved with instinct that seemed to come from a part of his brain that other species did not possess. The fight lasted 10 minutes that felt like hours. Hayes was struck by Vex's weapons and felt bones break. He was cut and burned. He bled so much that his vision started to fade. But every time he fell, he got up. Every time he failed, he tried a different approach. Every time pain tried to stop him, he refused to listen. The thing about humans was that they could accept damage that would paralyze other species with fear and pain. Hayes accepted his broken body as a price of fighting. He did not let the damage slow him down. He saw an opening in Vex's defense. Vex was strong and fast, but he was predictable. Vex fought like a being who had never faced a worthy opponent. He was arrogant. He believed that strength was enough. Hayes dropped into a roll and came up inside Vex's guard. He grabbed the collective leader in a hold that used every ounce of his remaining strength. Then he did something that Vex never expected. He held on. He did not try to win. He just refused to lose. He held Vex in that grip, even as Vex struck him with bone-breaking force. He held on until the moment when Vex made a mistake from frustration and Hayes was able to complete the hold. Supreme Leader Vex fell. His command authority died with him. The remaining collective forces, seeing that their leader had been defeated, began to collapse. The fight went out of them. They had believed that Vex was unstoppable. They had built their entire military structure around his leadership. Without him, they had nothing. The coalition forces pushed forward and destroyed the remaining collective ships. The Xylithian collective ceased to exist as a military power. Their government fell. Their territory was seized. Their threat to the galaxy was ended. Nathan Hayes was carried out of that command chamber on a stretcher. He was barely conscious. His body was broken in more places than it was intact. But he had succeeded. He had done what needed to be done. He had proven that humans were not just warriors who could win battles. They were warriors who could win when it seemed impossible. They were warriors who could sacrifice everything and still stand at the end. They sent SOS to allies, but the Deathworlders Armada came instead. Part 5. The New Era. War ended not with sudden peace, but with slow momentum. The Xylothian Collective's remaining forces were scattered across dozens of star systems. They had no central command. They had no unified strategy. They were simply remnants of an army that had already lost. Over the next weeks, coalition forces systematically dismantled what remained of the Collective's military infrastructure. Some ships surrendered. Some ships were destroyed. Some ships simply abandoned their posts and disappeared into deep space. Trying to escape the reach of galactic justice, Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the UNSS Earthshield and watched the final reports come in. The last collective base had been secured. The last enemy ship had been captured or destroyed. The war was over. She felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. They had won. The cost had been painful, but they had won. The coalition held a summit to discuss the future of the Xylothian territories. Many species wanted to claim the Collective's worlds and resources for themselves. The Solarians wanted mining rights. The Valorians wanted agricultural land. The Kethrans wanted technological access to the Collective's archives. But Commander Grant stood before the coalition leadership and presented a different proposal. The Collective's worlds should be returned to the people who had lived there before the Collective conquered them. The Collective had displaced millions of citizens. Those people deserved the chance to rebuild their lives and their civilizations. The coalition members were shocked by this position. It was generous. It was idealistic. It was the kind of proposal that a powerful military force should never make. If you won a war, you took the spoils of victory. Everyone knew this. Everyone accepted this. That was how galactic politics worked. But Lisa Grant explained that humanity's victory was based on something different. Humanity had not fought to take territory. Humanity had not fought to gain power. Humanity had fought because people needed protection. The goal had always been to end the threat and restore peace. That goal did not change just because the war was won. The coalition voted on Grant's proposal. The vote was close, but it passed. The Collective's worlds would be restored to their original inhabitants. The coalition would help rebuild what the Collective had destroyed. Justice would be restored through restoration, not through theft. Nathan Hayes recovered from his wounds in a coalition medical facility. The doctor said he would never fully heal. The damage to his body was too severe. But Hayes did not care. He was alive. His team had survived. The mission was complete. He was promoted to admiral. He was given the responsibility of creating the first interspecies military academy. Soldiers and officers from all coalition species would train together. They would learn from human tactics. They would learn from the lessons the humans had brought from Earth. Hayes accepted this responsibility, knowing that it was the most important work of his life. The war had proven something crucial. Different species could work together. Different species could trust each other. Different species could become true allies instead of just political partners. The Academy would spread this understanding to the next generation of military leaders. Marcus Cross and Zealous opened a trading post on a neutral station between human and Kethran space. They had fought together. They had faced death together. They had saved each other's lives multiple times. They decided to build something together that would represent that. Friendship. The trading post became famous throughout the galaxy. It was the place where humans and Kethrans came to do business. It was the place where friendships began. It was the place where the reality of cross-species cooperation was demonstrated every single day. Cross and Zealous became symbols of something new. They were proof that the bonds formed in battle could become the bonds of true friendship. They were proof that different beings could care about each other genuinely and deeply. Lieutenant Amy Powell was invited to speak before the Galactic Council about human military philosophy. She stood before the leaders of the galaxy and explained what made humans different. She explained that humans came from a world that taught them to accept sacrifice as a normal part of life. She explained that humans did not fear failure because they had failed so many times and survived each failure. But most importantly, she explained that humans had a capacity for caring about others that sometimes seemed illogical to other species. Humans would take damage to help strangers. Humans would risk their lives to save people they had never met. Humans understood that the strength of a civilization was measured not by how much power it possessed, but by how many people it protected. The Council voted to create a new position. For the first time in galactic history, a human would serve on the Coalition's Supreme Council. They chose Lisa Grant, the human commander who had made the decision to come to Meridians. Aid would now help guide the political future of the galaxy. Grant accepted the position with the understanding that she would represent human interests, but she would also work to understand the perspectives of all other species. She would be a voice for both humanity and for the concept that all beings deserved protection and respect. Grant stood on the observation deck of a Coalition station and looked out at the stars. From here, she could see dozens of different worlds. She could see the territories of species that had once been enemies before discovering they could be allies. She could see the space where the greatest conflict in recent galactic history had unfolded. She reflected on how a desperate distress call had become humanity's introduction to the galaxy. A call for help, a choice to answer, a willingness to sacrifice. These simple things had changed everything. The Deathworlders had arrived not as conquerors. They had arrived not as merchants seeking to exploit others. They had arrived as defenders. The galaxy would never be the same. Species that had been separated by culture and biology and ancient history were now working together. The Xylithian collective was gone. The power vacuum it had left was being filled not by conquest, but by cooperation. Resources were being shared. Knowledge was being exchanged. Friendships were being formed across species boundaries that had never been crossed before. Hannah Drake, the young medic who had served on the strike team that ended the war, stood in a hospital on a Coalition world treating wounded civilians. Humans were opening medical clinics throughout the galaxy. Humans were sharing their knowledge of how to survive extreme conditions and extreme injury. Humans were teaching other species that pain could be managed and overcome. Sergeant James York was training Valorian soldiers in human combat techniques. He was showing them how to use leverage instead of pure strength. He was teaching them how to adapt when circumstances changed. He was teaching them how to think like warriors while keeping their hearts connected to what they were fighting for. The human armada that had come to Meridian returned to their homeworld as heroes. But they did not keep their place separate from the rest of the galaxy. Instead, they integrated more deeply. Humans began to work throughout Coalition territories. Humans opened businesses. Humans formed relationships. Humans became part of the fabric of galactic civilization. Earth's leader, Chancellor Robert Hayes, gave a speech to the people of humanity. He told them that they had proven what they were capable of. They had proven that they belonged in the galactic community. They had proven that their unique perspective and their willingness to sacrifice made them invaluable allies. But he also warned them about something important. Power came with responsibility. The galaxy now looked to humans for protection. Species that felt threatened came to humans for help. This was a burden that they would carry for generations. But it was a burden that was worth carrying because it meant that they could make a difference. Commander Lisa Grant looked out at the stars one final time. She thought about the worlds that humans had helped save. She thought about the millions of lives that had been protected. She thought about the future that had been secured through hard fighting and harder choices. She thought about Nathan Hayes bleeding on the deck of an enemy ship, refusing to give up. She thought about Marcus Cross flying an impossible maneuver. She thought about Amy Powell protecting refugees who were technically her enemies. She thought about all the humans who had given everything to defend others. The Deathworlders had come to the galaxy not because they sought power, but because beings in danger had called for help. That single choice had changed the course of galactic history. That single choice had proven that humans were more than just warriors. They were protectors. They were friends. They were a species that understood the deepest truth of civilization. The strongest beings are not those who take the most. The strongest beings are those who protect the most. The strongest beings are those who sacrifice the most. The strongest beings are those who choose compassion even when they possess the power to choose cruelty. The stars shone bright above the galaxy. In the darkness, new friendships were forming. In the places where there had been war, there was now the possibility of peace. In the hearts of different species, there was now the understanding that cooperation was possible.